Welcome, my name is Daniel.
And I'm Jana.
We are excited to come alongside you as we start this study called Changed.
In our Sunday messages, we will look at different conversations and encounters people had with Jesus.
With each one of these critical conversations, our understanding of him deepens and our trust in him grows, and we learn how to emulate his behavior in our exchanges with others.
In Luke chapter 8, Jesus has an encounter with Jairus, a desperate dad. What we learn from that interaction is that God cares deeply about how we respond to life's interruptions.
We've all been there, where something doesn't go according to our plan. And as we dive deeper into this subject, here are a few questions to consider.
Feel free to pause the video for you to discuss. When you're ready, resume the video for the teaching.
I don't know about you, but my life is full of interruptions. I have 4 kids at home, all under the age of 7, and there's never a dull moment. In fact, the majority of interruptions are that someone needs to go potty, has gone potty, or is in the process of going potty. Interruptions stink, and they always seem to happen at the most inconvenient times. But today, I want us to try to shift our focus. What if life's interruptions are less of an inconvenience and more of an opportunity? I believe that if I were to ask the majority of believers in our church what keeps them from spending time with God, whether through prayer, Bible study, fasting, meditation, or worship, the main reason would be busyness. Life is busy. I know that this has been true of me in the past. We get into rhythms of work and life where we coast on autopilot and forget to slow down. Add kids, school, sports, and activities to the mix, and finding time to experience Jesus on a meaningful level seems impossible. So today, I want us to explore a story from Luke chapter 10 that will serve as an example of how we should prioritize our lives. Luke 10:38 says, "As Jesus and the disciples continued their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed them into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught, but Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing." This is a big deal. The most important guest of Martha's life is going to be sitting at her table tonight, and she has to prepare. Naturally, I get this. You can ask my wife. When we are expecting guests, I get anxious, I stress out over the house, clean, and it generally puts me in a bad mood. That's a flaw, and this is where Martha is. Verse 40 says, she was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. Martha is putting the cart before the horse. Rather than welcoming Jesus in and gleaning from his teaching, she's distracted by her busyness. Another flaw of mine is that I get irrationally frustrated when I feel like I'm hard at work while others are relaxing and having a good time. It's not fair. Unfortunately, this is another way I relate to Martha in the story. Verse 40 says, she came to Jesus and said, "Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me." This seems like a reasonable ask, to me at least, but the way Jesus responds is humbling. Verse 41, "But the Lord said to her, 'My dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it and it won't be taken away from her.'" Martha was upset. She felt like the situation was unfair and that Mary was in the wrong, but she wasn't. Martha allowed the interruptions to keep her away from the most important thing, Jesus. The interruptions we face are not always bad. In fact, most of our interruptions are not malicious. The vast majority are mundane and seemingly necessary, but here's the truth. We need to create margin so that we can experience Jesus in the mundane. I remember looking up to my heroes of the faith, people I respected, not just because of the eloquence of their speech, but because of their intimacy with God. And I would look at them and just think, man, I wish I could have that. Why don't you talk to me that way, God, like you talk to them? Why does my prayer life feel so pointless? I was jealous, and in fact, I was envious. The difference between jealousy and envy is this, that you are jealous when someone has something you deserve, but envy happens when you long for something you haven't earned. I hadn't done the work necessary to create margin for Jesus. I served in church all the time. I had friends who loved Jesus. I did all the right things in order to have the kind of faith my role models had. But when I look back, I was much more like Martha than Mary. I was concerned about the wrong things. I hadn't earned it. The relationship they were experiencing was one that's only found by consistently placing yourself at the feet of Jesus. I was busy in the kitchen, and they were leaning in at Jesus' feet. It wasn't until years later that I began to see a path from the busy kitchen to rest in Jesus. And the funny thing is, if you just keep reading, it's right in front of you. I don't think it's a coincidence that Luke directly follows up the story of Mary and Martha with Jesus teaching the disciples how to pray. Chapter 11 says, once Jesus was in a certain place praying. As he finished, one of the disciples came to him and said, Lord, teach us to pray just as John taught his disciples. Jesus said, this is how you should pray. Father, may your name be kept holy. May your kingdom come soon. Give us each day the food we need and forgive us of our sins, just as we forgive those who sin against us. And don't yield us to temptation. Prayer is the gateway to intimate relationship with Jesus. Not just praying before dinner or at bedtime, but living a prayerful life. Intentional times of prayer is what helps us drown out the noise and experience paradise now. I remember a story that one of my favorite Bible teachers, Tim Mackey, once told about how one day he was hiking on a trail somewhere up in the Pacific Northwest. And he had been on this trail for a few miles when he heard something rustling in the bushes. He was super startled, and fear began to set in when he realized that this thing wasn't running away. But as he looked closer, he realized, oh, this is a person, this is a woman, and she's crouching in the bushes. And the next thing he thought was that she was going to the bathroom because interruptions happen. But then she stands up, and she wasn't going to the bathroom. In fact, her mouth was full, and she put out her arms and said, look at these huckleberries. They're everywhere. Sure enough, Tim looked, and there were in fact huckleberries bushes everywhere. For as far as he could see, huckleberries free for the taking. But not only that, as he looked back at where he had been walking for miles, he saw these bushes had been along the trail the whole way. He had just never noticed. It took someone pointing out what had been right next to him all along before he could experience the free gift of huckleberries. In my experience, this is so much like my prayer life. I have always been told that we should have specific times to pray and have a quiet time, but never understood what it looked like to live a life of prayer. Finding moments throughout the day to worship God for who he is, thank him, confess for my shortcomings, and pray for the needs of the people around me in the moment. It is really hard for any of us to find an hour in a day to spend in a time of prayer, but what if we found moments throughout the day, free for the picking, to experience paradise with Jesus through prayer? There are opportunities everywhere, in the kindergarten pickup lines, as we are packing our lunches, on our way to work, in meetings, and while we're waiting for our Starbucks order. Following this rhythm transforms us from the inside out, but not only that, when we begin to live this way, we are more aware of how God answers prayers in small ways. It is when we are fueled by these moments that we can experience Jesus in the midst of our interruptions and our busy schedules. When our tank is full and we are sensitive to the Spirit, interruptions become an opportunity to experience Jesus. So how do we fill our spiritual tanks? Obedience. Walking obediently through spiritual disciplines like prayer, fasting, Sabbath, and reading the scriptures helps us become more kingdom-minded people, focusing on the only thing worth being concerned about, Jesus. Now take time with your life group to discuss the various interruptions in your lives and how they affect your intimacy with Jesus.